Cambodia, a small nation in the heart of Southeast Asia, surrounded by Vietnam, Laos, and Thailand. Unlike its neighbors, its population is strikingly smaller. While Thailand counts over 70 million people and Vietnam nearly 100, Cambodia has just 17 million. The reason for this gap is not geography, but tragedy. It lies in one of the darkest and most haunting chapters of modern history. Cambodia's forgotten chapter and its path to justice. To understand Cambodia, we must briefly touch upon its past. For centuries, it flourished under the Khmer Empire, but by the 19th century, the country had fallen under French control, becoming a proctorate in 1863. Cambodia gained independence later in 1953, re-establishing itself as a constitutional monarchy, a model inherited from its predecessor under King Norodom Sihanouk. Sihanouk's leadership brought significant reforms. Khmer became the official language, women gained suffrage, and Cambodia sought to remain neutral during the Cold War. But neutrality would prove impossible as the Vietnam War escalated right next door.
The United States backed South Vietnam, while North Vietnam operated through the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which cut across Cambodian territory. Washington accused Sihanouk of allowing the communists to use his land, and in 1969, President Richard Nixon, with Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, secretly ordered massive bombing campaigns across Cambodia. Hundreds of thousands of civilians were killed, and resented towards the West began to foster.
We take this action not for the purpose of expanding the war into Cambodia, but for the purpose of ending the war in Vietnam and winning the just peace we all desire.
In the shadows, a radical communist movement known as the Khmer Rouge, officially the Communist Party of Kampuchea, was growing. Led by Salot Tsar, better known as Pol Pot, the group soon gained support from North Vietnam and China. When Sihanouk was overthrown in 1970 coup by General Lon Nol, he fled to Beijing, where he reluctantly allied himself with the Khmer Rouge to regain power. That alliance transformed the rebels into a legitimate force in the eyes of many Cambodians.
A brutal civil war followed between the Lon Nol's US-backed government and the Khmer Rouge insurgency. As the fighting intensified, the country's rural population suffered immense devastation, and by 1975, after years of bloodshed, the Khmer Rouge had captured Phnom Penh. The fall of the capital marked what Pol Pot called Year Zero, the complete reset of Cambodian society.
Within hours, the new regime emptied the cities, forcing nearly 2.5 million people into the countryside under the pretext of an imminent American bombing. They were told they would return in 3 days, but never did. Thousands died along the way. Pol Pot envisioned a self-sufficient agrarian utopia, inspired by Mao Zedong's China, where money, private property, religion, and even family ties were abolished.
Citizens were forced into labor camps, working endlessly in rice fields with no pay, barely any food, and constant fear. Around 1 million Cambodians passed from exhaustion, starvation, and disease.
Intellectuals, professionals, and even those who wore glasses were executed as enemies of the revolution.
Minorities, Vietnamese, Chinese, Thai, Cham Muslims, and Laotian individuals were targeted for extermination. The regime's secret police, known as the Sang Tibal, ran prisons and torture centers across the country. The most infamous was S21, an old school where over 20,000 people were imprisoned, tortured, and killed. Only 12 survived. The brutality of the Khmer Rouge was systematic and ideological. Victims were executed with axes, hooks, and hammers to save bullets. Bodies were dumped into what would later be known as the killing fields. By 1979, nearly 2 million Cambodians, a quarter of the population, were dead, after only 4 years of Khmer Rouge rule.
Eventually, Pol Pot turned against his former allies. Vietnam, once supportive, invaded Cambodia in the late 1978, overthrowing the Khmer Rouge and ending their rule. But justice would not come quickly. However, the fall of the Khmer Rouge in 1979 did not immediately bring peace or justice to Cambodia. For decades, the country was left to rebuild in silence, its people living alongside former perpetrators.
It wasn't until 2003 that justice began to take shape. Under an agreement between the royal government of Cambodia and the United Nations, a special tribunal was created, the Extraordinary Chambers in the Courts of Cambodia, or the ECCC.
Its purpose was unlike any other in Cambodian history, to bring to trial only those most responsible for the crimes committed between 1975 and 1979, during the rule of democratic Kampuchea.
The court had the power to judge two kinds of people: the senior leaders of the regime and those directly responsible for the gravest crimes: genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and violations of the 1949 Geneva Conventions, as well as murder, torture, and religious persecutions under Cambodia's 1956 Penal Code.
The ECCC applied both international and national law, combining Cambodian and international judges in a unique model of justice. It became fully operational in 2007, marking the first time a former head of state was convicted of genocide by an internationally supported domestic tribunal.
Over 16 years, the ECCC investigated and held trials for the most senior Khmer Rouge officials. Among them were King Guak Eve, known as Dutch, who ran the infamous S21 prison; Nguyen Chia, Pol Pot's deputy, known as Brother Number 2; Khieu Samphan, the former head of state of the Democratic Kampuchea. Each received life imprisonment, the maximum penalty under Cambodian law, which does not allow the death sentence.
But the court was more than trials and verdicts. It was a platform for the truth and remembrance.
The ECCC took 3,936 victim statements and heard testimony from 334 witnesses. It was one of the few international tribunals where victims participated directly as civil parties, sharing their stories in court and helping shape the search for justice. Many lower-ranking Khmer Rouge members also appeared, not as defendants, but as witnesses, some even legally recognized as victims themselves. They told stories of how they carried out atrocities out of fear or coercion, enduring the same hunger, exhaustion, and executions that marked the regime's brutality. After all, Cambodia's tragedy was collective. It was a campaign of violence that spared no one, victims or perpetrators alike.
Beyond verdicts, the ECCC worked to repair what could still be healed. Its reparations program supported mental health and education initiatives, preserved memorial sites like S21 and the killing fields, and created a national day of remembrance to honor the victims.
In the aftermath of the Khmer Rouge regime, Cambodia society began to rebuild its sense of identity and community. Buddhism as a religion in the national identity have very big weight in the reconstruction process. This practice helped to individuals reinterpret trauma, reestablish the interpersonal trust. This religion and cultural renewal functioned not only as a spiritual healing, but also means the reconstruction of collective memory. Some anthropologists argue that this combination of cultural revival and kinship repair negotiate this memory making, how to portray this memory through official discourse. Not all narratives are the same in the process of reconfiguration the society. Schools, museums, and the extraordinary chambers of courts in Cambodia, the ECCC, have played a very central role in formalizing the remembrance. Documentation Center of Cambodia is the institution that have this introduction to genocide history in secondary school, for example, in the curricula, the official curricula. Through these educational programs, they have to understand the violence with this official point of view. But when you go to the rural areas, when the hotspots were, you have a very different narrative, maybe more violent. But I think these two kind of perspectives was very important to understand the phenomenon in its entire aspects.
Survivors received free medical and psychological care, and community projects helped them share their stories through testimonial therapy and self-help groups. Schools and museums incorporated the tribunal's findings into educational programs, ensuring new generations would know what their parents could not speak of.
So in Buddhism, you have this institutional Buddhism and this local tradition that in its entire core, they have served as essential frameworks, offering moral, cosmological, this sense of communal or community, in local terms. After the fall of the Khmer Rouge, the revival of Buddhist institutions, monasteries, monastic ordination, and festivals provide these spaces where you, as a survivor, could process trauma within shared ethnical narratives. The core essential of Buddhism was translate to a process of healing. This process, it was not so even. It's not the same if you are Buddhist and have this process of reconciliation and these tools and these institutions as if you are another minority. You have to discriminate some narratives that is not useful for the national friendly process of reconstruction in Cambodia.
By the time the ECCC had concluded its work in 2022, it had spent nearly $300 million and delivered only 3 convictions. For some, that was too little, but for others, it was a beginning, a declaration that the crimes of the Khmer Rouge would never again be erased or denied.
Cambodia's recovery is not completed project. It's more about an ongoing process. You have this negotiation between official histories, life experience, and these political frameworks through which communities continue to make sense of this loss. And you have to reconstruct with the tools and the people and the practices that you have.
The extraordinary chambers in the Courts of Cambodia did not rewrite the country's past, but it gave it a voice strong enough to echo beyond the courtroom, reminding the world that even after decades of silence, justice, however delayed, still matters.